about which few people are aware, a history of sacrifice in wars fought long ago.
Just like today's population of Fort Bragg, many people who live here or live in the perimeter of this military base contribute a lot to war efforts. And that's always been the case for people who have lived in this area of the Sandhills, beginning with the earliest conflict of the colonies, the American Revolution. It was experienced here by the Scottish immigrants and others who lived here, regulators in fact. It's been experienced through the Civil War period of America. We had large numbers of population from the Sandhills area in these communities of Argyle and Inverness and Manchester going off to war and never coming back. We know that from family histories. We also know it from church records that the impact was very severe on the population of this area. There are gaps in the church records that for 16 years there were no christenings because there were no new babies.
Although soldiers went off to fight in faraway battles in the American Civil War, there was a major clash between Union and Confederate cavalry forces on 10 March 1865, right in the middle of today's Fort Bragg. It was the Battle of Monroe's Crossroads. Today, relics of this battle are still being found. The artifacts of this battle from this war between brothers are preserved at Fort Bragg. After the Civil War, it would have been understandable if people had left this land of the longleaf pine. But they stayed.
But people stayed. People stayed on this landscape. It's always supported them. They maintained their turpentining, they maintained their Tar Heel heritage, and kept it going. I like to sum it up by thinking of this area of the Sandhills, the pre-Fort Bragg landscape, as the land of tartans and turpentine and turmoil.
Another war has been fought and won at Fort Bragg. Secretary Bill Ross of the North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources told Exploring North Carolina a compelling story of environmental stewardship.
In the 1990s, the situation at Fort Bragg might be described as the Woodpecker Wars. At that point, concerns about the threatened and endangered species, the red-cockaded woodpecker, had interested parties at war. There was Fort Bragg, there was the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, there were private environmental groups, there were state agencies, and it was a very polarized and contentious debate. A number of people described them, that situation, as the Woodpecker Wars. The great thing that happened was that the warring parties found a better way, and that better way has led to success for every interest that was involved, from the base to the woodpeckers to the communities around Fort Bragg. They came up with the idea of a partnership approach that might serve all their various interests and missions at the same time. The partnership came to be called the Sandhills Conservation Partnership, and it was a non-traditional blend of partners. There was Fort Bragg, there was a federal agency, Fish and Wildlife, a state agency, Parks and Recreation. There were private environmental groups like the Nature Conservancy and Environmental Defense, and there were private landowners involved as well. Recently, the Sandhills Conservation Partnership celebrated a great success. The head of the Fish and Wildlife Service came to town to announce that this particular threatened population of red-cockaded woodpeckers had indeed recovered, and at the same time the military base had been able to reduce the restrictions on training that before the partnership had gotten together were being imposed on the base because of the woodpeckers' threatened status. At the same time, the vitality of this economic driver for the Sandhills region was assured in an important way. The partnership successes that emerged out of the Woodpecker Wars led the leaders of the various organizations involved, garrison commanders, community leaders, agency leaders, and environmental group leaders, to think about what else might be done. A partnership emerged, for example, to achieve a sustainability in the region around Fort Bragg, the sandhills, called sustainable sandhills. The woodpecker model, recovery model, was applied in the area around Camp Lejeune. The sustainable sandhills model is now being replicated on a multi-state regional basis in the southeastern United States.
Stewardship at Fort Bragg and cooperation with its neighbors has existed for many years. There is no better witness to Fort Bragg's willingness to work with the environmental community than Alvin Braswell, Curator of Herpetology at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences.
Large blocks of habitat are extremely important to our natural systems and protecting the diversity in North Carolina. Military bases are areas where we have some of our best large blocks of native habitats. Amongst these, Fort Bragg is premier in that the amount of acreage, the type of management they pursue in there, their primary goal is national security, but they're also helping us greatly with protecting our national treasures. The museum's history with Fort Bragg dates back for many, many years, into the 1940s. Personally, my first involvement with Fort Bragg area was in the late 1960s. I was particularly interested in the reptile amphibians that occur in this wonderful longleaf ecosystem that's being maintained there. In particular, the eastern tiger salamander, the Carolina gopher frog were of interest of mine, in addition to the northern pine snake and the southern hognose snake. All four of those species are ones that we're greatly concerned about in North Carolina because of their declines, and Fort Bragg is maintaining some wonderful habitat for them. Of course, there are lots of other species there too, and fascinating things like eastern coach whip and the beautiful scarlet king snake.
Soldiers training at Fort Bragg are surrounded by amazing plants and animals. More than one soldier has been startled by giant fox squirrels in the oak and longleaf canopy, squirrels the size of small cats. Soldiers in wet areas can see the mysterious Venus flytrap and elegant pitcher plants.
Fort Bragg's work with the federally endangered red-cockaded woodpecker is notable, and they should be applauded for their efforts. They've done a wonderful job of managing for that species and promoting their recovery on base. They have a huge number of colonies and nesting pairs. This is a key species in the longleaf pine ecosystem, because if you manage and do a good job with red-cockaded woodpecker, you also are doing a wonderful job with a wide range of other species that are typical of the longleaf ecosystem, which used to be a huge system in southeastern United States. It's been greatly diminished. It is an endangered ecosystem itself. But Fort Bragg protects a huge area of longleaf and these other species in association with that.
Now you've seen the other Fort Bragg. The American military defends our way of life. But I hope you also appreciate the great job they do in preserving our cultural and natural resources. As my good friend Bill Ross has said, the great stewardship successes at Fort Bragg have not been by accident.
You know, one of the great aspects of the Fort Bragg story is that it involves a set of visionary leaders who have seen that ultimately the success of the military mission lay in them looking beyond the fence line of Fort Bragg and the military base, and the realization that the base existed as a part of a broader community. They've become environmental leaders and sustainability leaders because that was crucial to their mission. And in that approach lies a lesson for all of us. If we're going to get where we need to get as a state today, we've got to look beyond our traditional fence lines, build partnerships, and achieve the conservation and sustainability goals that are crucial to a bright future.
For additional information about this or other episodes, go to these websites. Starting in 2008, episodes of Exploring North Carolina will be made available to public schools across North Carolina through the generosity of the William R. Keenan Jr. Charitable Trust. Exploring North Carolina is made possible by major financial support from DTS Software, Mainframe Storage Management Solutions. Additional support for this series is provided by the Friends of the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, the state's prominent center for science education and outreach, and the future home of the Nature Research Center, where visitors will be encouraged to participate in ongoing scientific research. And by UNC TV viewers like you.